Story 1: The Unsettling Visitor. Welcome everyone tonight. We dive into two real-life tales that give us a chilling reminder. Sometimes even our homes may not be as safe or private as we think. But before we get started, give us a like if you enjoy these creepy stories, and feel free to share your own experiences in the comments below. You never know, your story might make it into a future episode. 3 years ago, I moved into what seemed like the perfect apartment. The rent was reasonable, the neighbors polite yet distant, and the building itself had a quaint, almost antique charm. Built in the late 90s, it still had the odd fixture that hinted at its age. The wallpaper peeling in some corners, the wooden floors creaking, just enough to be atmospheric, but not annoying. My landlord kept the place well maintained, with regular rounds of renovations to keep everything looking modern. It was a building with character, but nothing seemed sinister about it. Life in the apartment was routine and, up until recently, uneventful. That changed a few months ago, when my longtime neighbor, a retired teacher named Mr. Griffith, who had been living next door since the building's completion, decided to move. I would often see him in the hallway, and we'd exchange pleasantries. He'd occasionally talk about the sounds he'd hear from the building late at night, but I always brushed it off as something from the creaky old structure. I thought nothing of it when he moved. The landlord wasted no time, however, in beginning renovations on the apartment next to mine. From then on, my evenings were accompanied by the sounds of power, drills hammering, and workers moving in and out. I got used to it after all. Renovations don't last forever, and I could endure little noise. Then one evening the workers packed up their things, and the sounds stopped by sight. In relief, the silence that replaced the noise was refreshing. At first that night, after catching up on a few episodes of my favorite series, I went to bed around midnight, expecting a peaceful sleep. However, around 1 a.m. as I lay drifting off, I heard soft footsteps coming from the staircase. Now this wasn't particularly unusual. Residents frequently used the stairs at all hours. But there was something about these steps that caught my attention. They were light, cautious, almost as if someone was intentionally trying not to be heard. The sounds grew closer, until they stopped right behind my bedroom wall. My heart began to race, and I strained my ears to hear more. There was a faint shuffling, like the movement of someone adjusting their weight on the stairs. I thought of the workers, and the fact that the renovations next door were incomplete. Maybe one of them was staying in the unit. But that didn't add up. Surely the landlord would have informed me if someone were temporarily occupying it. I lay there, heart pounding, waiting for the footsteps to fade away. The next morning I brushed it off, convincing myself it was my imagination or some odd acoustics in the building. But then it happened again 2 nights later. This time, the footsteps were accompanied by a soft knocking sound, like someone tapping a finger or a knuckle against the wall. It was soft, almost hesitant. It stopped for a moment, then resumed. It felt as though whoever or whatever was making the noise was trying to get my attention. Terrified, I lay in bed, my mind racing with every possible explanation. Sleep was out of the question. I stayed up the entire night, jumping at every small sound. The next day I contacted my landlord, explaining what had happened. He assured me that no one was living in the unit, next door and that the workers had finished their work. He promised to check the locks and secure the building. That evening, as I returned home from work, I noticed fresh paint around the doorframe of the neighboring apartment, but nothing out of the ordinary. I locked my door tightly, double-checking it, and spent the night watching TV, trying to distract myself. Around 1 a.m., just as I was about to turn in for the night, the footsteps returned. They started on the staircase and moved closer, each step deliberate and slow, as if the person was creeping up the stairs. This time, I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. Within minutes, I saw flashing lights outside, and 2 officers entered the building. I heard their voices outside as they checked the staircase, a neighboring apartment. But when they returned to my door, they reported finding nothing unusual. One of the officers, sensing my fear, kindly suggested installing a security camera. In the days that followed, I went ahead and purchased a small camera, installing it in the hallway facing my door. A few nights went by with nothing out of the ordinary. I began to feel foolish, wondering if it had all been some bizarre coincidence. Then, just as I was letting my guard down, the camera caught something. Around 1 a.m., on a Tuesday, the hallway light flickered, casting an eerie glow on the walls. And there in the faint light, I saw the shape of a person. They stood at the base of the staircase looking up, frozen, as if deciding whether to proceed. I watched horrified as the figure took one step up, then another, slowly ascending until they disappeared out of view. The footage sent a chill through me. This was no ghostly apparition. It was clearly a person, but who and why were they here? Night after night, I sent the video to my landlord, who, disturbed by the footage, promised to take further action. The footsteps never returned after that, however, or whatever it was, had seemingly vanished, but every so often, when the building creaks or the wind rustles through the hallways, I remember those nights and the eerie presence that lingered just beyond my walls. Story to the unexpected intruder. When I first heard of Paradise Apartments, I immediately knew it was where I wanted to live, despite its rundown reputation and the occasional complaint from residents. It was the perfect price, pet-friendly, and in a neighborhood that was relatively close to my work. The rent was cheap too. I'd been told it was because of the neighborhood's questionable safety, but I was determined to make it work. At first, life at Paradise was normal enough. I'd come home from work, unwind with my cats, and go about my evening routine. But then something strange started happening. I would come home from my early morning class, just as I did every Tuesday, and find things moved ever so slightly. My undergarment box, which I always kept tucked in my closet, would be out in the middle of my bedroom. At first, I thought I was simply rushing out in the morning and leaving things askew. But as the weeks went on, I began to notice a pattern. It wasn't just the box. Sometimes I'd find my kitchen drawers open, or my bathroom cabinets slightly ajar. My cats, though playful, weren't capable of moving the heavier items, and they usually stayed confined to their favorite spots. On the sofa, a nagging sense of unease grew within me, but I tried to shake it off. One evening, my boyfriend locked himself out of his apartment. In my hurry to bring him a spare key, I left my apartment lights on, expecting to return within minutes. But when I got back, I noticed something odd. The lights were all off, every single one. including the basking light from my pet lizard. I was sure I hadn't turned them off. My heart raced as I cautiously entered the apartment, calling out to my boyfriend and locking the door behind me. The next day I reported the incident to the landlord, hoping for an explanation. He dismissed it, suggesting I'd simply forgotten to turn off the lights. But I knew I hadn't. When I asked if anyone else had access to my apartment, he assured me only maintenance staff could enter, and only for emergencies. Weeks later, the same maintenance worker appeared at my door, claiming he was there to fix my countertop. He was a scruffy, young man with an indifferent expression, and he worked slowly, almost lethargically, as he drilled and hammered away at the new installation. After 2 days of disruptive noise and clutter, I was glad when he finally finished. Yet his visits didn't stop there. One evening, after a long day, I was drying off from a shower when I heard my door creak open. I froze. He was there, standing in the doorway with no tools in hand. No reason to be there. When I questioned him, he muttered something about a maintenance check and quickly left. My skin crawled. Something about his presence felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been watching me. My Eunice grew to a breaking point. After my mother visited to help me move out, she caught the maintenance man attempting to enter with his key, claiming he needed to inspect the door. When she questioned him, he stammered and left, leaving me feeling more vulnerable than ever. A few years later, I crossed paths with Paradise as owner in my new line of work. When I mentioned my unsettling experiences, his face paled. He admitted that the maintenance worker had been caught breaking into tenants' apartments. The man was fired shortly afterward, and a wave of relief washed over me, but a sense of dread lingered. Looking back, I shudder, realizing how close I'd come to facing a far darker outcome. Thank you for tuning in tonight. If you've had a strange experience of your own, we'd love to hear about it. Remember to subscribe for more chilling tales, and we'll see you in the next episode if you dare.